Wow. Well, Pitt fans, obviously tonight ends on a bit of a somber note as the Pitt Panthers lose on the road to Boston College 31-30 in overtime. And that is back-to-back losses now for Pitt against two teams that most around thought were not only must-win games, but very winnable games. So Pitt, formerly riding high, now needing to pick themselves up after back-to-back losses, including tonight's 31-30 overtime loss to Boston College. I'm Mike Asti, and joining me is Mike Vukovcan of Pittsburgh Sports Now, as we're going to guide you through what potentially could be a venting session for you, and definitely want to hear Mike's takes on what his thoughts are now that Pitt has lost these two in a row, and especially this loss tonight. Mike actually could not be with us last week. James Santelli, Pitt fan and out of KDKA, joined me. And he thought this one was at least for assured as well. Pitt now having that Miami game coming up, but as Mike told me prior to this broadcast, it really doesn't matter right now. It's about this loss and what to make of things. So again here, Mike Asti, Mike Vukovcan, Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Feel free to chat along if you'd like. If not, Mike and I will just give our thoughts. So Mike, I do want to kind of give you the floor. You weren't with us last week. You didn't get to touch on that loss. Obviously, these two games on the post-game shows we did earlier in the year and everything you've been covering in Allen too, figured to be wins for this Pitt team, certainly if they wanted a special year, certainly if they wanted that Miami game to really matter. Not only do they not win this game in overtime and eventually blow this one that seemingly was a winnable game for sure, they do it after losing last week as well. So what's your mindset right now, I guess, after this loss in OT?
I'm actually, as I was walking downstairs to my desk, I was having a hard time figuring out what to focus on because there's so many, obviously everyone's going to think about the last kick by Kestman after nailing a 58-yarder, and his inconsistency all season has kept going. The only thing he's been consistent about is being inconsistent, and it cost Pitt today. But I honestly, Mike, I don't even know where to go with this. I'm gonna lean on a couple things, and we can expand upon it later.
Sure.
The biggest thing is I think Phil Jurkovec tore this defense apart. At last count, he had I believe 14 to 15 passes of 10 plus yards against his defense. And all we heard about this coming into the season and after a few games was, this was going to be, the best defense, blah, 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 NFL draft picks. And for 2 to 3 straight weeks now, I think they've let this team down. When Pitt scores 30 points in a game, right, and whatever they scored last week, 29 points, whatever the score was, they lost by a couple points to NC State. They need to win those games. The secondary continues to give up big play after big play. Jason Pinnock struggled again. And I want to say this, a couple of those plays that he got beat deep, I don't know who's maybe somebody was supposed to help him. I think we talked about this last time. I don't know what the coverage is, whether it was Hamlin for whoever was supposed to help him. The bottom line is somebody didn't do their job in the secondary, and the Pitt secondary continued to struggle. They had chances in the first half to get off the field on third down. They did a good job of Boston College on first down. They kept in the second and third long, and they just couldn't get off the field. And this had to feel really good for Jurkovec, not only getting a big ACC win for his program, but doing it against his hometown team and shredding them up. And that's what they did. They shred them up. And the other thing I want to touch upon is, I know they scored 30 points, but I'll continue to say this, and I'll continue to say this again. I don't think this Pitt team has any identity on offense. I think they mix in running plays just to do it because they think they have to do it. It's almost a waste of time because nobody on the team is capable of running the ball. The offensive line was bad again today. They cannot run a block. Kenny Pickett's getting killed back there. Anyone that wants to blame Kenny Pickett for anything just leave town because you have no idea what you're talking about. If it wasn't for him, it's just a bad overall performance. And the bottom line, it's a bad look for Pat Narduzzi. And where do they go from here? You and I, a couple of weeks ago, both thought this could be a 5-0 team heading into Miami.
We did.
I have a hard time now, I'll be honest with you. I'm just looking at the schedule. Aside from maybe Georgia Tech, because they have a freshman quarterback, I have a hard time possibly finding another win for Pitt the rest of the season.
Yeah, and there are tons of ways to go here. And I do think that this really does have to be a game that is on the defense just because of the hype coming into the season and because of the talent level on that defense. But regardless, this certainly was a winnable game. But I do actually recall earlier in the year, I think it was after week 2, we even touched on that Hamlin in particular had been missing some coverage. They allowed that touchdown, I think it was to Syracuse late in that game where they kind of were asleep at the wheel. And both of us admittedly thought, okay, it's early in the season. They're leading these teams. They're not really playing competitive teams yet. Maybe it's just one bad play. He's a very talented kid. It'll pick up. And overall, the numbers were there for the defense through those first few weeks. But now, when you look at those moments and you compound it to now this miserable performance, mostly by the defense, and even the loss last week, even though the defense was a little bit better than they were tonight, now it looks even worse. Now it's Damar Hamlin and company deserve maybe some criticism levied their way based on the hype they have, the talent they have, and the fact that this defense didn't show up enough tonight. I do think also Kenny Pickett, 25 for 48, 266, 2 touchdowns, interception, averaging over 5 yards per. He had, again, we've talked about this. He's much better than he was years ago. He always gets tons of criticism, but I think there's been a maturation process with him as a leader of this team, and he's doing enough for you to win. You're not going to ask him to win the Heisman every week. This is not Trevor Lawrence. This is a guy who, if he gives you almost 300 yards passing with a relatively decent percentage and quarterback rating and throws a couple TDs with only one mistake, you have to take that and figure that's enough to win with this defense.
The problem with this defense, Mike, is in the first half when they were allowing a lot Jurkovec to go down the field, and I believe they scored 3 touchdowns or whatever. Mm-hmm. They weren't getting to the quarterback, and that's the thing with this defense is it's feast or famine. And in the second half, they did a lot better job, I believe, up until overtime, until that last drive or whatever. Right. Because they were getting to the quarterback, Savachier Dennis, Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver. They were getting home, and then your cornerbacks aren't on an island out there. In the first half, when they're not getting to the cornerback, and Williams and Pinnock and all those guys are forced to play man coverage, they're relying on pressure on the quarterback, so they're not covering a long time. And they weren't getting that in the first half, and the result was, he threw for, I believe, 268 or something, 270, something in the first half, a large, and his numbers were down in the second half. And the reason was, like I said, and that's the problem with his defense. You better get home to the quarterback, because if not, you're putting your cornerbacks on an island, and they better do a hell of a job covering them.
Yeah, and Jurkovec finished 19 for 35, 358, an average of 10 per pass, which is ridiculous. 3 touchdowns and no picks, but a lot of that was in the first half, as you mentioned, that Pitt's defense. It's happened in the last couple of weeks. They seemingly kind of figure it out, but it's too late. Then you're in a barn burner, and then you're relying on special teams, you're relying on kicks, and yes, you hit the 58-yarder. We see the extra point later. But to answer one of the chatters there about going to blaming this on Kesman, he hit a 58-yarder, which is incredible at that point, and he had missed some kicks earlier in the season. We see the extra point, but I really think that when you think about this, and I'm sure what Narduzzi is telling this team, you have so much talent, especially on defense and on offense, with Pickett and Addison as well, that it shouldn't have come down to that. These are teams, these last couple of weeks, they shouldn't have this much of a problem with. Mike Vukovcan and Mike Asti here on Pittsburgh Postgame after Pitt's loss, second consecutive loss, this one to Boston College in overtime, 31-30. Mike, I do want to get your thoughts here. We have a chatter here talking about poor offensive line and defensive back play would have never been in overtime, I'm assuming, without, I guess, the rest of the crew. But any thoughts there in terms of the defensive line and the defensive back play? We kind of brought it up earlier with some in the secondary.
I didn't so much have a problem with the defensive line. I thought they, I thought they did what they always do.
Right.
As far as the offensive line, I think they're bad. I just think
Right.
they're bad. There's no other way to put it. This is 2 years in a row now. You can blame it on, maybe it just comes down to talent and evaluation. And they got guys in there. This is their second year now of playing. The excuse, the reasoning last year was, right. I don't think it was an excuse because it could be legitimate. 4 of the 5 starters last year were starting for the first time ever in college football. So when that's happening in a Power 5, yeah, you're going to have struggles. All those guys are back this year. It shouldn't be like this. They cannot. I'm tough on these running backs because I don't think they're really.
I was going to go there. Yeah.
But at the same, I just don't know what it is. It's a combination. You can't be a good running back, unless you're Barry Sanders or whoever that can make stuff on their own. If you have no holes, and that offensive line is just, I think Pitt has swung and miss. We talk about their recruiting, and that's a lifeblood of any program. Looks to me like they got a bunch of guys in the offensive line that Narduzzi needs to. I don't know what he's going to do. Knowing him, he's not going to do anything. Just, what's he going to do? Another guy that hasn't done anything before?
Yeah, for this season, sure.
Yeah, it was interesting though that Owen Drexel started at center and Jimmy Morrissey at right guard for the first half. I'm not sure what went into that, but I just don't think they have the talent up front. And one thing I wanted to bring up, Mike, and I'm not sure what you thought, I thought this was a critical part of the game.
Yeah.
Pitt was down. It was after how much time was left? Under 6 minutes left in the game. They Boston College shanked a punt, and Pitt took over at the Boston College 45-yard line, and they were down by 3. And you think, so what? Considering the fact that they couldn't run. They couldn't run at all. They're at Boston College's 45-yard line. What do you think Mark Whipple calls there? Three straight running plays.
Yeah, well, what I was going to bring up. Yeah,
that is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
If you're going to do anything, you go with a quarterback. You try to pass it. You're at Boston College's 45-yard line.
Right.
You're 10 yards away from being able to kick a field goal, but who the hell knows with Kessman now? He couldn't make anything. But 3 straight run plays, that didn't, that's a segment of the game. I'm not gonna, but that was just part of the head scratching play calling.
It almost
by Mark Whipple.
Yeah, it almost appears, and of course he wasn't at the program forever, but it almost appears at that point you're playing scared a little bit. That's almost like a scared play call that you're in a game that maybe shouldn't be this close and you're kind of nervous. But you look at the running game. I was going to bring this up because this is what we talked about every single week. You certainly brought this up a lot on Pittsburgh Sports Now. There really is not a featured back here. They always talk about it on the broadcast, and maybe it's because of undersizing. Maybe it's because of what you just touched on in terms of the offensive line. Maybe the offensive line is not good enough to help any of these kids establish themselves. Yeah. Vincent Davis, 17 carries, 48 to 46 yards, an average of under 3 for everybody except for Addison on one little run play. So anyone who officially got a running stat was all under 3 yards per carry, as bad as that is. And that includes Pickett, who was able to have almost 40 yards rushing on the ground and show a little bit of his athleticism. Thoughts on the fact, though, that unlike past weeks, and this even includes last week's loss, Addison was not able to really emerge despite getting a lot of looks. And there really wasn't able to be, and you mentioned those 3 consecutive run plays, because this kind of goes into what I was going to talk about in terms of maybe the play calling. Pitt wasn't able to really establish a big play in this game to really take the top off the defense or to swing momentum into their favor long enough. Any reasoning on why that was? Because that's uncommon from the prior 4 weeks, including even the one loss.
Yeah, I can answer that. I don't know. I'm starting to I'm starting to have. I'm at a loss.
I guess if you could answer it, you wouldn't be with us. You'd be coaching the team.
Watching that game. I'm starting to have a lot of questions, and I don't have a lot of faith, to be honest with you, in Mark Whipple. I just don't know.
Right.
EJ Turner, he goes last week from having 168 yards or whatever he had, the most yards by a Pitt receiver in 15 to 16 years. And this week he catches one pass. There's nothing downfield ever. When they did tie the game up on that, miracle field goal by Kessman, every pass they were throwing were the same one. It was a sideline pass, a not very high percentage pass where you're looking for complete touch by your quarterback. Instead of trying to go down the field, get your guys in space, let them run after the catch, they tried the same straight pass, 3 to 4 straight attempts between Tipton, Shockey, Jacques Louise, and I think it might have been Addison. I don't even know. Maybe it was Mac. But I don't know.
So
I can tell you this, though, Mike. It's going to be a long week for Pat Narduzzi on social media.
It is definitely going to be a rough week for Pat Narduzzi, and he may say he doesn't care, but it's definitely going to be a rough week for him for sure. And I even go back to last week's postgame show speaking with James, who mentioned that he had not yet lost favor in Pat Narduzzi. He was willing to give him the rope because just the one bad game. This now does compound that now to back-to-back weeks in not just must-win games if you want to have a special year, Mike. These were games that you had to win to even make the rest of the year meaningful. I mean, to be fair, I'm sure a lot of your subscribers, a lot of these fans, a lot of Pitt loyalists are going to think to themselves, well, that Miami game is no big deal now. Why am I going to get excited? What's there to get excited about the rest of the season? Because you lose this now being a conference game, you lose these conference games in overtime to teams that aren't really contenders. It definitely takes a little bit out of your sails here. Mike Vukovcan, Mike Asti on Pitt's edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Now.
But I think it goes past that, Mike, too. He's in year 5 of being here. And these are games that if Pitt he was very bullish this offseason going into the season. He's mentioned a couple of times on how this was the best talent he's had on this team.
Right.
This is not a rebuild job anymore. He shouldn't be needing luck to happen and this to he has talent on this team.
It wasn't even just him. Nationally, people were predicting Pitt to have a real chance this year in the ACC, if not beyond. This defense was said by national media members who have no Pitt bias. Some don't even probably like Pitt, who said this could be one of the best in the country. It's not performed like that, and this team has not performed like that.
Yeah, and there's too much talent on this team to have these performances like this. They didn't have penalties weren't an issue today. Drop passes, inconsistency on the offense, and they have no identity. You brought up the point too, and it was a good one with Addison. He caught 7 passes again today, right. But they were all the underneath. I wrote about that 2 weeks ago. If this team wants to start
51 yards. Yeah. If he has 7 catches, he should be over 100. 100%.
Yeah, 7 for 51. That's all that underneath stuff. And when you can't run the ball, your defenses are caving in anyway, so you're not going to get anything. They have too many weapons on offense to look to be like this. Once again, the tight end was no factor in this offense. That continues to be that's a yearly thing. This team's in some trouble, and
it wasn't supposed to be that. No. This was supposed to be the year that Pitt maybe was going to have a tight end to help out Kenny Pickett a little bit.
Yeah, Lucas Kroll, I think that kind of. But Kai Wright, I don't know where he is. Daniel Moraga, he's not there. But I'm telling you, if this season, I don't think Pat Narduzzi's job's in trouble. I'll say that. However, I will say though, that if they finish this season, and like I said, looking at this schedule, Miami, Notre Dame, you go to Florida State. So I know Florida State isn't a good program right now. That doesn't matter. They still have more talent on their program, on their roster than Pitt does, regardless of what their record is. They bring in higher caliber recruit.
Yeah, just look at Florida recruiting. Yeah, even if they get the worst Florida kid, it's a very talented kid.
And then you got Georgia Tech, or Virginia Tech, and Clemson. I'm telling you, I'd be hard pressed to find 2 wins there. And if you finish this season with 5 wins, when you're talking about having your most talented roster there, Heather Like and the administration over there are not paying Pat Narduzzi to put up 5 wins and for him to talk, and that will not be acceptable. Like I said, I don't think anything would happen after this season. However, next season, who knows?
I do
come back.
Yeah.
If Kenny Pickett doesn't come back next year, you're going to be starting next year with a redshirt freshman quarterback in the ACC. So good luck with that.
I think the problem for Narduzzi is exactly what you hit on, and this is what we've talked about throughout all these post-game shows, and which pretty much has been discussed throughout all of Pitt media, is this was the year, while there's pressure, this was the year to get it done for Narduzzi. People could have said years ago, and I even did a show on this in the offseason that you complimented me on, okay, you got to give him time. He's now finally getting his recruits in. This maybe could be the year. Before, maybe you was kind of having to rebuild the program. But to have this season go off the rails, and Mike, when you were talking about you can't find a win here, you know what immediately I thought of? And maybe this is just being a WVU alum or just knowing what's happened with this Pitt program. You know what Pitt's going to do. They're going to end up upsetting one of these teams and kind of ruining their year. But I feel like even if that would happen, because Virginia Tech is certainly beatable, and even if they would beat Notre Dame and kind of bump them out of the top 10, even if somehow the world would collapse and they would somehow upset Clemson to end things, which has happened against teams of that caliber years ago. I'm not predicting it by any means, but my point is, even if they would beat Miami, who is maybe not as good as their ranking, I'm sure then you would think okay, if you can do that, then why lose to NC State? Why lose to Boston College and let the year not be a special one? Because those upset wins are great, but the year could have been more if they would have beat these winnable opponents, and they didn't. So now you have this issue where a win is going to have to really be an upset, aside from that Georgia Tech win. What I do want to ask you, though, aside from just Narduzzi's job, because certainly the thought process behind him is going to be different than where it was even a week ago after that loss. If you had to, divvy up the blame for this game or even this season, now 3-2 Pitt team, as they will play Miami next weekend, how would you hand it out in terms of percentage-wise? Does most fall on Narduzzi? Does most fall on the offense coordinator with Whipple? Does any fall on the defense, or does that still kind of go back to Narduzzi with any of these individual players? How would you percentage-wise break this down?
Number one, I would say the offensive line. That's number one.
Okay.
I just don't think they're very good. Second, it would be a tie between. See, that's the hard thing, Mike, and you know that. When you say the offensive line is the problem of your team,
I know
that has to impact.
You cannot be a championship team if the offensive line is not good. Period.
And it's almost, and I don't want to make excuses for him, but it makes it almost impossible to call plays,
right,
knowing that your offensive line isn't very good. So let's just say that. But I'm gonna go after, because of that, I'm gonna say the secondary, number 2, okay. And that's because Phil Dracovic today, 300 plus some yards. If you're this, if you're all that, you don't give up that. And last week against NC State, Kenny Pickett, they score a touchdown with 1:12 left or whatever in the game. You have the game on the line. Your offense just went down. You take the lead. You got to hold them. If you're a championship team, you don't let a kid that's starting his first game this year drive right down the field in 48 seconds and beat you. Sorry. You can talk all you want. You can do whatever you want. But when you allow that stuff to happen game after game, some of the blame has to go on you. And third, I would go coaching, Narduzzi / Mark Whipple. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm fading on Mark Whipple as a coordinator. I'm not going to blame Randy Bates. You could say the coordinator, but anyone that knows Pitt knows that this defense is run by Pat Narduzzi, and Bates could be called the defensive coordinator, but Pat Narduzzi is defensive coordinator. Is there anything that happens as far as schemes and calls and blitzes and personnel and all that stuff? That's all run by Narduzzi. And when he continues to want to press instead of maybe backing off a little bit, that's on him, and that's his style. He's an attack guy. He wants to go after the quarterback, and he will not bend on that. And it's been him the last couple of weeks. And and as far as the discipline, which was the problem last week, you got better this week, but it cost them again a winnable game against NC State last week. So I go coaching for number 3. So it's offensive line, secondary, and Pat Narduzzi / Mark Whipple.
And when you have a season that goes off the rails like this against teams that aren't really contenders, it's absolutely going to point back to coaching one way or another. And I think that's the most disheartening thing, I'd imagine, for Pitt fans, is the fact that Narduzzi was brought to Pitt to build, obviously to coach a program, but to build a defense in particular because of his resume. And you would figure that if they're not going to win, if somebody would have told you this Pitt team goes off the rails and they still can't get it done 5 years in a couple years ago, I'm sure you would have probably thought Kenny Pickett regresses, the offense doesn't have weapons, they can't get it together offensively, but the defense, knowing the recruits that were coming in, was at least going to be good enough, and the offense would let them down. The defense hasn't shown up to the level of the hype based on the talent that is there. Certainly, the offense, Kenny Pickett has been good enough at times, even though without big plays in this game. So to have the defense be an issue with a defensive-minded head coach who's now been there a while with a veteran group and a really talented group, that got to be a disheartening thing for Pitt fans for sure. Again, Mike Vukovcan, Pittsburgh Sports Now's Pittsburgh Sports Live post-game show here after Pitt loses to Boston College in overtime, 31-30. Back-to-back losses now for the Pitt Panthers, 3-2 on the year. They will meet Miami, who right now is trailing 7-0 to Clemson in that game tonight. But, of course, you're going to figure Clemson to win basically all their games. Any other thoughts here, Mike, on the rest of the season, even maybe what you're planning on discussing, if you want to tease anything for the site, or just really about this game? Because obviously it wasn't good. Obviously the big plays weren't there. The offensive line's not great. There's not really an established running back. The defense hasn't been what it's supposed to be. We can go on and on and on about all of that. It's all there in evidence. But this team is going to try to pick up the pieces here, and the talent is maybe there to steal some of those games. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm certainly not going to put money on it. I'm certainly not going down to the rivers and putting any money on it. But just what are your thoughts here moving forward? Because they will play games and maybe even play games with some fans being there, but hopefully they get down the stadium if they can, and Pitt fans haven't totally lost interest by that point.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. I think the season, I don't know what they're not going to win the ACC. If they go to a bowl game,
which they're opening up the doors for people to get in bowl games this year because of COVID, but it might not matter, obviously.
They're going to go to the same typical,
right?
Who cares bowl game? It really doesn't matter. I think they need to, the rest of the season,
anything different that maybe you want to see for this team, because you feel like
they need they need to develop an identity on offense. They have to find a way to run the football. They just have to. And when they brought in Mark Whipple, there is no Pat Narduzzi. If you know anything about that guy, he wants to run the football. He wants to control the football. He wants to run the ball 20 sometimes, 30, like he used to. They brought in Mark Whipple in order to be able to help the passing game, and all that is done is killed the identity on offense. And I don't know how you get that back. I don't know if I'm not smart enough. I'm not making the money they are. I don't know if it's scheme. I don't know if it's person. I don't know if you have to change personnel, bring in some of the younger offensive linemen that they've been talking.
What would have to happen this year? Because I'd imagine they're obviously not going to do it yet because we're still early in the year and they feel like probably that Miami game could be a deciding factor here. But what would have to happen in this season, or is it now, to literally put somebody else in as a starting offensive lineman, to literally just say to Vincent Davis, you're going to carry it 25 times this week. I want to see what we have. Would you go into a mentality of a rebuild if, say, they would lose to Miami and then they somehow, obviously Notre Dame's going to be rough, but even if they would lose that Florida State game, what would have to occur to just basically throw the white flag and say, we're basically doing practice this year now?
I would do it this week. Okay. As far as the offensive line goes, I'd grade it out. I'd have to go watch it and see why they're not getting any push. Is it the play calling? Is it, or as far as the run plays? I don't know, but I would totally break that apart. And I love that idea. I would run the ball. It keeps you defense off the field. They got to find some sort of, they can't go into next season.
Unless you get down in games, that would be the problem for them. If you start trailing to Miami.
Yeah, but they still have the ability. That's the thing. They know now that they have enough receivers. Kenny Pickett cannot be throwing the ball 48, 50 times every game. That's just not good.
No.
You got to be able to run the ball. And it's embarrassing the way you mentioned Vincent Davis's stats. One of those was a 14-yard run. So you take the 14 off of the rest of his carries.
I think he was an average of 2.7. The yards per carry were not good. No, nobody really was
14, good. That would be 16 for 32. That stinks.
Right, it does.
It's terrible. And nobody else got a shot. Alan brought this up, and I have no idea. I don't know why this guy seems to be in Pitt's doghouse. If you want to look at a guy that might want to transfer after this season, Todd Sibley. Alan and I have talked. I wanted to do something on it this week. Maybe I will. Why that guy hasn't got a shot to at least run the ball. He came in the one time for the Wildcat today. He's completely gone into at least he has a little build to him. He came here as a decent running back. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but they refused to put him in there. And obviously Daniel Carter and AJ Davis are still injured, or they would have been in there. They just have no semblance of a run. The only good thing is, who knows, they'll probably get wasted in this offense, but they do have 2 4-star type quality backs coming in next year in their recruiting class, assuming they sign in December. Malik Newton and Rodney Hammond, two kids from Virginia, high pedigree kids, probably their highest rated running backs since AJ Davis. So, I could see a complete, I don't know.
Well, especially when Pickett's gone, you're not going to, because you talk about Pickett and you talk about this running game. This includes Pickett week after week as part of the running game. He has been very valuable. Without Pickett, this team might be 0-5. I mean, it is unbelievable what he's asked to do in these games. These are not numbers that you normally would see out of him in terms of what he's asked to do even a year or so ago. But this season, he is asked to throw the ball almost 50 times, certainly 40 in most of these games, and run it at least 10 times. And he's getting you almost 40 yards on the ground and almost 300 yards through the air. I don't know what else you want from him.
Right, exactly. That's my point. That's my point. And I was one of the few guys last year.
If he does anything more, he's in line for some awards at this point.
Yeah, he ran the ball, as you mentioned, he ran the ball 14 times today. Sorry, your quarterback shouldn't be running the ball 14 times.
No, Vincent Davis only 3 more carries, and nobody else was close to him. Nobody else had more than 10 carries besides those 2.
And he threw the ball 48 times.
Right.
It's
a lot.
I said this last year, and I'll say it again. He got a lot of criticism last year. Pitt fans wanted to, and they had the same problems last year as they do this year. Kenny Pickett is not the problem. Is he Dan Marino? No, of course, nobody. Nobody is. But he's a heck of a lot better than I think a lot of people actually think he is. I think he has a lot of talent. He's finally has some receivers around him. His problem is for 2 to 3 years, his offensive line is below average and his running backs are below average. That makes it real hard on a quarterback.
It really does. And the only thing that can be good for him, and in all likelihood, he's not more than somebody who's holding a clipboard at the next level, but I'm sure people are going to look at this Pitt team and really dissect it like you're saying and say, well, Kenny Pickett didn't have much to deal with around him for so many years. He has weapons now, but the offensive line is porous. So if he's able to do this with that situation around him, it will actually only point to the betterment of his favor moving forward in his individual career to get some money for him in the future, maybe. But yeah, he's asked to do a lot this season. It's unfortunate because Addison really emerged a few weeks ago where people thought he could have been a star wide receiver. That was talked about nationally. He's getting looks, but they can't open up. They don't seem to have a chance at a big play anymore after the Syracuse game with him. And Kenny Pickett just asked to do a lot. So, and that's going to be an issue moving forward to next year. You're talking about finally getting a running game. It almost is like Pitt never can figure it out. They finally, going into this year, they finally had a defense, but the running game's still not there. They have a veteran quarterback. Next year, okay, they can get a running game, but Kenny Pickett's going to be gone potentially. So that would be a problem if that's the case. It just seems like it never can get together. And Narduzzi's not going to be able to use that as an excuse here either.
Crazy thing, though, is because of the crazy year we're in, you don't know who's going to the NFL yet. That's the thing.
Well, yeah.
I don't know what Kenny Pickett's thinking. He won't.
It's better served for him to wait as long as he can, probably.
Yeah, he could decide, since all these kids are able to come back for another year, because it's a
right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Play free year. He can decide, hey, I want to come back for another year, and that would be good for Pitt. Wouldn't be good for the other quarterbacks on the roster, because obviously.
You could even think that the way the season has gone could go one of two ways in his head. He could think, I got to get the hell out of here because I'm going to get killed throwing 50 times and running 10. I got to get my money at some point. Or he could think, well, we didn't get it done this year. If I think more help is coming, I'm probably not Dan Marino, of course. So maybe this is my peak of my career. Let's have a special year next year. Yeah. And maybe I'll try to get an ACC championship out of it and make that the best moment in my professional or my football career, whether professional works out or not. It could, either one could be in his head. Obviously, we don't know. We're not in his head. It'll also depend on what happens with COVID. But generally speaking, Kenny Pickett's not a high-level draft pick, of course, so you normally would advise him to come back if that is a possibility. But I feel like his usage rate's a little high to ask that of him, because you individually, he's being asked to do a lot for sure. But yeah,
Mike, the Pitt fans, they just wonder. The administration and everybody connected with the program. You've been around enough.
Yeah.
This, and they wonder why people don't support the program as far as fans. The fans they should be amazed at the fans they get. Consider the inconsistencies of this program. And
they might want to stop worrying about fans being in the stadium, because they might not get any to come down there.
Yeah, the ups and downs that this team puts their fan base through. You people finally starting to want to believe in the program. We're turning around. We're getting these recruits. We got these NFL type players, and then you go out, and you crap the bed like you've done, for the last 2 weeks.
And I think what Pitt doesn't understand either, that the fans certainly are preaching, is if this season did not end up as special as I admittedly thought as well, and say Pitt finished at the end of this year with 3 or 4 losses, if they would have lost to Miami, to Notre Dame, to Virginia Tech and Clemson, I'm sure you would have said, well, the year should have been better than that. That sucks. But those are programs that are perennially ranked and are legit programs that I can respect. But when you have these losses to teams that are rebuilding and are in the midst of a year that they're not a contender, you talked to Boston College all week. They think they can win. They think they're good, but they understand this is a rebuilding program for them, where it's an upset for them to get a victory over a Pitt team that was ranked a couple weeks ago. That's worse. Like that bites even worse. Yeah. For in terms of a Pitt fan with this program. You can stomach some of these other losses, even though you want to eventually beat them. But these losses make you can't even. I don't know how a Pitt fan can get excited for that Miami game. It's really got to be a bitter taste in their mouth before that game.
I can't see how they'd be excited for the rest of the year. Because you just know that there's nothing aside from pulling off an upset, and Pitt has to be, as we both mentioned, you're in year 5 in Narduzzi. They got to quit talking about upset.
Got to be better than that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You do that, then you are what you are. But you can't continually be talking about upsets and pulling surprise. You got to be, you got to be considered a good program by now. It doesn't take that long. It's 5 years. I guarantee you, the way Jeff Hafley recruits at Boston College and the way he can coach defense, Boston College is going to be a problem for people. It's not going to take Jeff Hafley 5 years to turn that program around. I can guarantee you that. And we're going to be entering year 6 of Pat Narduzzi, and we're going to be talking about the same old stuff every year. It's just
It really does feel like a broken record, to be honest with you. I normally have a whole sheet out with prep notes and certainly did those, but I didn't even need it for this show
No.
because it's same old story. It really is. It's just broken record for Pitt fans. And I can only imagine what they're thinking. I can only imagine watching that game and just the annoying factor for even, unbiased parties like myself. So yeah, Pitt, once again, they are losers back-to-back weeks, in fact, for Pitt, losers as they lose tonight's game 31-30 in overtime to Boston College. They have Miami coming up. They have some big games and tougher opponents coming up, and maybe they could throw an upset here or there. But as Mike put it, you got to be better than that at this point. It was cool, I'm sure, for Pitt fans when they did it to West Virginia. I'm sure it was even cool when they did it to Clemson years ago or Miami years ago. But I got to imagine it's lost its luster a little bit at this point. And it now is going into sixth year for Pat Narduzzi.
One other piece of bad news for Pitt fans here. Just thinking about this, I'm looking at the Miami score, and I'm looking at the obviously.
I was about to give you last word here. So
with Pitt, they're big, and I think they have a right to be upset with the fact that they haven't been able to see much of Pitt because all their games have been on the ACC network. Well, guess what? Last week they determined that the game against Miami was going to start at noon, and it would be to be determined what network, whether it was going to be the ACC network or ABC.
Right.
I guarantee you, ABC ain't picking up Pitt when they've lost 2 games in a row and Miami lost. So I would lay my house on the
fact. A 5-0 Pitt team against Miami would have been on ABC.
4-1.
4-1 would have been, sure.
Yeah, 4-1 against a 4-1 versus Miami. That has a chance to getting on one of the ESPN networks. Pitt being 3-2, and then Miami, they're probably going to get horse raced here against Clemson. That game is destined to be at noon on the ACC. We're talking 5. What's Pitt now? 3-2. 6. Their first 6 games of this season will be on the ACC network, and 90% of Pitt fans probably haven't seen a play aside from what they see on Twitter.
Yeah, and if Pitt ends up getting boat raced in that game, maybe they won't even end up preempting volleyball, and volleyball will preempt Pitt in terms of which program's a contender or not right now, because I heard that on the broadcast that will get you to volleyball later. It's like maybe Pitt fans will be better off watching volleyball. Right. But, just Mike, is that your final word? Anything else here, obviously, as we close up shop here, Pitt? They lose again. I can't imagine how to get excited for the rest of the year, certainly with where these games are in terms of their broadcast and how they are now going to mean more to the opponent than to Pitt. And that seems like that's just the story. Games mean more to the opponent than Pitt. And the cool factor of spoiling somebody else's season, I'd imagine, is just gone at this point.
No, Narduzzi and his staff are going to have their challenge is going to be trying to keep this team's head in the game, trying to keep them motivated, and at the same time trying to develop some younger players, but also for some of the older guys that are know that the season doesn't have anything left, and not start to think about the NFL. That's the reality of things. So it's going to be tough. And speaking of tough, and I'm trying to think of what the heck I want to write about for a column here right after here, because I know what I want to write, but I'm not going to get into fire the coach here, so I got to come up with something different than I wrote last week.
Well, I think we managed to air grievances, allow fans to vent, and do it in a relatively respectful and mature fashion here. And that's going to be the sexy thing, to just immediately say fire the coach. But as Mike said, that's not realistically going to happen. So it really is pointless to discuss right now unless this goes off the rails again next season. But the pressure is on. It maybe should have happened already for the Pitt program. Pitt losers again. They lose this one in overtime, 31-30, another winnable game that Pitt does not win. The Miami game, which could have been a big game, well, it's not really going to be a big game, at least not from Pitt's perspective. We'll see if Pitt knocks off any of these teams moving forward, see how they finish out this year with still tons of talent. And as Mike also put it is going to be a pretty lit week in terms of Pitt Twitter, Pitt fans, Pitt media, in terms of thought process around this team, around this coaching staff, around a lot of players here. But if nothing else, I think Kenny Pickett has showcased himself and maybe should be given a pass. If anyone gets a pass this week, I feel like it should go in the direction of Kenny Pickett. For Mike Vukovcan, for all of us through the Now family of networks, Pittsburgh Sports Now, and of course, Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Asti, and we'll see you when we see you. And Pitt fans, I can only imagine. All right, thanks.